Please join me in welcoming Greg. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Gordon, for inviting me all the way out to British Columbia. And there was, as we say back in Maine, you can't get there from here. And there was a point where I thought maybe that was going to be true. I wasn't going to be able to get here, but I'm thrilled to be back. Personally, I'm very happy to be back in BC, back because I had the opportunity to live here for the better part of the summer in the mid-90s and enjoy everything that the Nelson area had to offer. And on one road trip to Vancouver had the best apple I have ever had in my life. It's not in Okanagan. To date, it's still the best apple I've ever had. And so for that, I thank you for that experience. I'm just curious, before we start this panel, am I too loud or can everyone hear me? Maybe a little feedback, okay. A little bit of a sense of who's in the room. I'm going to be talking specifically about agriculture, and it's always really nice to know how people are engaged in agriculture, if they are engaged in agriculture in the room. So my first question, just a quick show of hands. How many folks here work for government, work for your provincial or county government? How many people work for the private sector? Great. And NGOs, or that's sort of in the middle? Excellent, excellent. How many of you in your capacity, whatever you do, are engaged with agriculture sector work and farm work? Oh, fantastic, okay. And how many work with the value chains in the food system industry, sort of writ large? Terrific. And how many of you were here yesterday? Oh, good, okay. This is good, because what you're going to find is that a lot of the themes that are going to come out and what I'm talking about are just working the same groove of the same themes that you've heard about for the past 24 hours. Our rural experience in Maine is similar, if not the same, to the rural experience here, which is challenging but also reassuring that we are all working on the same issues and identifying those same issues and working towards solutions. So with that, I'm going to start with just a couple of stories. I know Linda has a whole bunch of wonderful stories, so I'm going to pretty quickly get on to what CEI is, Coastal Enterprise is, the work I do, the tools, and the model we've used to be effective. But stories are our lifeblood. Stories and the people we work with are the reason we get up every morning and do the work we do. So for that, an example of a story, an example of a client, a farmer I've worked with, Dan Harriman, a top conventional dairy producer. And like all conventional dairy producers, he's a price taker. He has absolutely no control over the price of milk that he receives at the farm gate. At the same time, he has to manage all of his variable costs, and he has to cover his fixed costs. So back in 2009, when milk prices plummeted and grain prices soared, he really felt the squeeze. And like many dairy farmers, he had to take out debt to cover that, and got strung out on a line of credit with the grain, his grain company, and was floundering. And a couple years later, when we met him, was still floundering. He didn't have enough cows either, because he hadn't had the financing or the cash to be able to have enough cows to achieve efficiencies on his farm. So he went to his bank that he had worked with for 25 years at that point, and had a perfect track record with, and what did the bank say? No, you're too much of a risk. 25 years of a perfect track record. You're too much of a risk. And so there he was, and he's a dairyman, and as we know, dairying is a calling as much as a job. This is what he wanted to do. Well, he found us and he got in touch with us, and we worked with him to, one, provide technical assistance. Business, you're going to hear me talk about TA, and business technical assistance is one of these critical components of our model that has led to the success of many of our stories and many of our clients. We had him work with a free business counselor who for the first time got his business down on paper, and the financial model down on paper, so he could see exactly how many cows he needed. He thought he needed 15. Well, actually, in the end, he needed 20. And the financing of that was very doable. We looked at that and we said, we can do that because we can see that the profitability and the income that will increase with those cows will lead to increased profitability. And while we're at it, why don't we consolidate all that debt and restructure it? So that is exactly what we did. And so we financed those extra cows, which increased his income, increased his profitability. We got rid of that horrible strung out line at 18% with the grain company and consolidated the rest of his debt. And by so doing, saved him over $6,000 a month in debt payments. And he increases his profitability. So now that farm is sustainable. And Dan Harriman, who is a young dairy farmer at 45, can now farm for the foreseeable future. He is also, like any client, and I was just talking to Linda about this, he is forever in our portfolio. Even if he pays back his loan, he can always call us and come to us for business counseling, other financing. There's no time limit. These folks are part of the work we do. The door is always open. We are public service. So that's a typical farm. One more quick story. Northern Girl, a veggie processing company in Aroostook County, Maine's northernmost county. That's the thumb that sticks up into Canada. All right, that's our part of Maine. It has some of the most fertile farmland available, and really is the future of farming that we see, not only in Maine but in New England. I'll touch on that in a bit. And they developed this company. The entrepreneur developed this company specifically to support the farmers in the St. John Valley in Aroostook who had very limited access to other markets. And suddenly, as a fresh frozen IQF, individual quick freeze plant, those farmers can for the first time think about growth and scale and have a market opportunity for their products. And because they were not seeing a light at the end of that tunnel, they were not they were seeing dwindling options. So on the farm side, it supports organic farms and conventional farms, but significantly organic farms. On the other side of this value chain, they're looking at the consumers, and they do go direct retail. That's sort of their bread and butter, Whole Foods. They get their product into that. But that enables them to hit their mission of getting as much nutritious, healthy food to as many people in Maine, all people in Maine as possible. So significantly, they support the institutions and the public schools. They want to get into 40 school systems in the next 3 years. Now, Maine has the highest food insecurity rate of all of New England. And 1 out of 4 kids goes hungry every day in Maine. 1 out of 4 kids goes hungry every day in Maine. So for that food from Northern Girl to get into those schools where those kids, because of the federally subsidized free and reduced lunch program, can access, possibly at the only point during the day where they can access fresh, frozen, fresh, because they also supply fresh carrots, for that meal at lunch is no small feat and hugely important to their mission. And we find that incredibly aligned with our mission. And so we have helped them with both business technical assistance and financing. We do want to see them grow. They are one company that we would like to see grow because they have only just begun. And it's just such a small amount of food that's getting in to feed these kids. So it's stories like that that are the lifeblood of our work. They give us juice and the hope that we will indeed move mountains. And we've heard this over and over again. The work we do is tough, and it really does feel like you're putting a shoulder up against that mountain and pushing and pushing. And the way we actually handle that is by breaking down that mountain and working with the individual stones and trying to just roll those stones down the road a little bit further, business by business. So just a little bit of context as we move on here. Maine is 35,000 square miles. That's roughly 3 times the size of the CSRD. The nonprofit sector, I know alphabet soup, so CSRD, I'm learning the lingo. We have 1.3 million people. Our largest city is Portland, and that only has 66,000 people. So 90% of the population lives rurally. New England, however, as a whole, is 72,000 square miles. BC is 5 times the size of all of New England. So you'll hear pretty quickly how we think regionally as part of our strategy in developing the Maine agriculture sector. Just because we are fairly small, we need to think about that in terms of markets, but also just population density, enough people. 1.3 million people in Maine, 4.5 million people in Metro Boston area. That is important for us to leverage those urban markets. Maine has some interesting other ag statistics that are really interesting. Is Maine's agriculture is a $1 billion industry, pretty small. 8,000 farms working about 1.4 million acres of land. We have, with the latest census report, the third largest increase in growth in new and beginning farmers. We're the third. Everyone's coming to Maine. It's fabulous. That was such an incredible day when we woke up to that news, because it's signifying that we do have something to offer for that next generation of farmers, that it's a business climate and a environmental climate that shows hope and opportunity. So we welcome that. Our average farm sizes are about 178 acres. That's about 71 hectares, if I've done my math right. Average age is about 57. Very similar to what you all are experiencing here. Interestingly, the median farm size is around 67 acres, 27 hectares. So again, we have a lot of small to very small farms, which again brings up this interesting issue of scale and how do we produce enough food to feed ourselves. Importantly, there's some sector conversations. The one I'm going to just mention is the Food Solutions New England group has put out a mission statement, 50 by 60. We would like to produce, New England would like to produce 50% of its food by 2060. Right now we import 80% of our food. We are the end of the line. We joke in Maine that if New Hampshire lays siege on us, we are in big trouble, you know, because there's about 3 days worth of food on the shelves of the grocery store, and then we're done. You know, we need to figure out how to be more self-sufficient and how to grow those businesses locally. I mentioned before we think of regional markets. Portland is certainly our biggest city at 66,000, but we have to look beyond Maine to build the agriculture sector in Maine, to serve the markets in Boston, the smaller cities in Western Mass, Northern New York, Providence, Rhode Island, and even New York City. And we do need to build our brand. The Maine brand is carried fairly well in the tourism sector, and Maine lobsters everyone knows about. But Maine as an experience, as agriculture, as food, is something we need to work on, much like Vermont has done successfully. And they've been busy on that for many decades, showing good results there. So, here we go. Who is CEI? I'm going to take a step back. I'm going to just talk briefly about CEI, Coastal Enterprises. That's the organization I work for. And CEI, like our rural communities, has had to reinvent itself over its 40 years of existence. We've always maintained a commitment to rural, creating opportunity for low-income people, economic justice, and opportunity. We are a rural community development corporation and financial institution. Brian yesterday mentioned the term CDFI. It's a federally designated term out of the Treasury. We are a financial intermediary where we source funds, pool them, and get them out in the community. We are, again, I think it's particular to the United States, a nonprofit, also known as the third sector. We step in where government won't, we step in where the private sector doesn't, and we move things forward. We create economic opportunity for low-income people through financing, business technical assistance, PA, and strategic initiatives and policy. We found that this three-pronged approach in particular works in creating change and having impact in our rural communities and the lives of low-income people. We adhere to a no wrong door policy. Ron Phillips, our founder and CEO, said there is no wrong door. You have an idea, you just come to us. We will see if it fits within our structure and framework. We will work with anybody because we know we can't do this work alone. We're traditionally a triple bottom line. We look through that lens at all of our businesses, through the economy, equity, and environmental impact that the business has in order to fulfill our sustainable mission. And with over 800 million, as you can see, under investment, we have a 40-year track record of place-based investing in natural resource sectors, in small towns throughout Maine. We know our communities, we know our sectors, we're in it deep. A few other stats that are up there, those are over time, since 1977, 30,000 plus jobs created or retained, 1,600 plus housing units, and over 5,600 child care slots. That's not child cares, that's child care slots. highlighting what the folks were saying yesterday about some really critical resources needed in the rural landscape in order to build our communities and wealth. So where does agriculture fit into this? Over 40 years, we've always done agriculture work. We've had to reinvent ourselves many times. So I'm just going to talk about the effort we've been essentially piloting since 2010, when we launched the Sustainable Ag Investment Fund. This is the program that I run with my colleague Daniel Wallace and leverage the 85 other staff at CEI like crazy. We are a program of 2, but we are a very robust staff at CEI of lenders, of loan services, of workforce solution, workforce training specialists, business counselors, and policy folks. So back in 2010, like many of you, and I'll be interested to hear from you, we saw an opportunity and felt the demand for access to capital from Maine's ag sector like we had never felt before. I mean, it just blossomed. You know, we had suddenly so many young farmers wanting to get on land and recognizing that financing was a potential tool to get there. You know, it's not always the right tool, but when it is, it can do things that no other tool can do. I know Linda's going to speak to that as well. We also saw an extraordinary need for capacity building in management and financial management, technical skills like QuickBooks or accounting systems, and some of those softer skills around negotiation and contract management. And how do I, you know, talk to this guy about a lease? And, you know, when do I need legal counsel? When do I not need legal counsel? And we realized that we could really show up and do an extraordinary job with this model of technical assistance and financing to serve the farm sector. Another key piece was we saw that we needed to do this with a systems approach. You know, when I started with CEI, I was very farm focused. But in 2010, we really saw that to build the farm sector, you need to build the whole value chain with it. You have to somehow figure out how to give lift concurrently to all of those businesses, which are market opportunities for the farms. So we began looking at how do we make sure that we are not creating barriers, actually, along the way, but that we're creating further opportunity in our investments. So since 2010, when we launched the SAFE, as we call it, we have invested over $8 million into the local food system. Those are loans and investments. That is leveraged into those deals because we often don't work alone, prefer not to work alone, actually. Invested another $30 million for a total of $40 million of investment into local agriculture. That is 110 discrete investments with close to 70 clients. It's created 360 jobs, created or retained 360 full-time jobs, and maintained over 10,000 acres of farmland in production. As they say in Maine, we have been wicked busy these past 5 years. Now, I'm really proud of the work we've done. We have done this with a lot of it just intuitively. I mean, we certainly have lending talent, we certainly have skills and capacity in-house, but it has been a pilot. And so what I'm seeing now is that there is no decrease in demand for risk capital and the kind of capital that we can bring to bear that's flexible and patient and tailored to business needs. And we're poised for significant growth. And we will grow this portfolio to 50 to 100 million over the next 5 to 10 years, just because we see that is where we need to show up to build the agriculture sector with this mission-driven impact capital. So with that, what is our mission? Very briefly, it's to create a just food system that produces good food for all people. It is a grow food, feed people strategy that is equalizing and just. It's driven by a vision of robust rural economies, innovative and resilient farm communities, and thriving working landscapes. We love working landscapes in Maine, and working waterfronts, and working forests. We do want to move mountains, and we do know the way to do that is one business at a time. We essentially serve farm and food businesses that cannot get access to traditional forms of capital, that either at all or match their stage of business growth, that matches their risk profile. We work with many low-income people. We work with lots of people with little backgrounds in business management and financial management. In other words, these are high-risk credits. Yes, sir?
So I don't mean to interrupt, but I have a question. All of these areas where you're redeveloping vibrancy in agriculture, what was going on.
That's a really good question. So where are we making the investments? Yeah. So agriculture is happening in all of these communities. I think typically what we are seeing is generational transfer. So what we're seeing are a lot of our average age of farmers are retiring age farmers, and their retirement is completely wrapped up in that farm, meaning that is their retirement fund. So they need to get value out of that. And then we have these new beginning farmers, some of whom are quite young, some of whom maybe it's a second career, but are having a hard time figuring out how to make that work, to be able to buy that farmland without some interesting structures. We are seeing a decline in dairy, and we are seeing declines in, how do I say this? We're seeing decline in activity, but it's almost a restructuring to the smaller farms. We've lost a lot of infrastructure in Maine, a lot. Rail, we do not have good rail that would get product, for instance, down to Boston. I love seeing the train go by here in Salmon Arm. I'm not sure what's on it, but I love that you have it, because that is the kind of thing that we do not have at all. So what I would say 5-10 years ago, it was pretty dire. You know, we were seeing a lot of farms just get out, especially dairies, get out. We only have 300 dairies left in our state. That's not a lot of dairies. But what we're seeing is this revitalization. We have not targeted specific areas except to pay particular attention to a rustic, because there is so much farmland up there that can be growing things pretty much at scale. So does that, I don't know if that answers your question. I know we're going to have Q&A time, and I'm going to wrap up pretty quick here to get to Linda's presentation. Did I answer your question? Sort of? Okay. Follow up with me afterwards, okay. So we do tend to finance startups as well as existing businesses, existing farms. But startups, banks don't typically like to finance startups. Young beginning farmers or entrepreneurs in the value system. There aren't a lot of models for these value chain, for veggie processors, incubators, small malt houses, these smaller scale enterprises along the value chain. So really, it's a gamble. You know, we do rigorous due diligence, we leave no stone unturned, but at the end of the day, you got to make that leap to see if it will actually, you know, just to see if we can make this work. Generational transfer is huge. We do this through TA, the financing, and strategic. I'm calling it strategic initiatives more than policy, and I'll tell you why in a second. Our TA, boil it down as business counseling, free business counseling services, but then we work with a vast network of other service providers in production, value chain management, legal, accounting, all of that. Wrap it around funds to get them what they need to either build to investment quality business plans, so that we can invest in them, or just they might not need financing, and that's fine. That is not a prerequisite of working with CEIs that you need financing. And financing, the hallmark of our financing is patient and flexible. We do loans from $10,000 to typically $1 million. Mostly our sweet spot seems to be, because of the kind of organization we are, in this $200,000 range. There's some smaller outfits that can take care of smaller loans. We certainly do a lot of them, but folks come to us for that 100 to 250 range often. We are secured lenders, meaning we do require collateral, but we are also relationship-based lenders and know that successful loans are based on as much on the character and capacity of the entrepreneur as on the cash flow and the collateral valuation of anything that the deal presents. So now we just have some nice pictures of some of our clients. Where should we go? Let me really quickly, I'm going to just go through 2 more stories, because I just love the stories and you have to indulge me with the stories. So we work with a lot of dairy farms. Dairy farms typically need a fair bit of cash to cash flow and to working capital. And what we're finding is a really interesting emerging wave of young beginning farmers who come with actually many years experience either growing up on their own family farms but have not owned their own operation, so that makes them more of a risk to lenders, for instance, who want to get into organic dairy. So Matt Willett is one of those farmers, grew up on his family farm and worked for a number of farmers and wanted his own operation, but didn't have the cash, leverage into a mortgage, and didn't have a track record of operating his own business. So the banks said no. I just wanted to make it seems like I'm harsh on the banks, and maybe I am, but they also are our partners, and we work with banks often in either sub-debt capacity. Again, there's no wrong door, but these are just the facts. This is what's happening to the people we work with. So Matt Willett was ready to start his own farm, and we thought he was too. But in fact, truth be told, he posed too great a risk for even us to finance the farm and the cows. So I knew of someone that I had met and worked with, a colleague named Jacob Israelo of Dirt Capital Partners, who invests in farmland and has a particular interest in organic dairies. And as an investor, he buys the farmland and leases it for a specific period of time to the farmer, in the hopes that at the end of that lease term, that farmer then would be able to have built some assets, built some equity, and leverage that into a mortgage. That's the idea. It's a brand new day in that world, and we're all watching it very carefully because we're not really sure of mission and intention behind some of these outfits. But I had worked with Dirt Capital before and felt pretty comfortable approaching him and saying, would you be interested in this? He was. And we then could just look at the cows, and I brought this to my lenders, and my lender said, okay, so you want us to finance $100,000 for the cows, someone who's never owned his own operation. You go ahead and figure out how you're going to make that happen. And I said, how about I pull down a 90% federal guarantee on our loan, reducing our exposure from $100,000 to $10,000, and they said, that works, we can do that. So we financed the cows, we got a farm service agency guarantee on that, so that we were able for it to fit even our risk profile. And Dirt Capital bought the land and is leasing it to the farm. What was really important piece of this is there was about 6 to 8 months of TA prior to this to get the model, because Matt certainly didn't have that. So there was a lot of pre-work to get to a point where we were comfortable doing that deal. What was really important to me and to folks at CEI was that at the end of the day, farm ownership was critically important. And if he was going to lease, we did not want him to set him up for that constant wheel of having to lease again, or at that 7-year mark, not having any hope to buy that piece of property when all was said and done. So what we built into the cash flow model was not just the lease payment, which was just an interest only, basically interest only on that loan, is we built it in like as a mortgage with principal and interest to make sure it does not work with cash flow, so he can start socking away cash and equity. And so he's building equity in his herd, he's building some cash equity, and a few other things, so that we are setting him up for in 3 years, if he wants to go to Farm Service Agency for a very low interest mortgage, he might be eligible at that point and be able to buy that farm. And that's ultimately what we want to see, but we know that the traditional means of accessing those opportunities are going to be fewer and far between, we think, with this cohort of emerging farmers. So that's one example. Again, I could talk about dairies all day, but I will not. I want to move right to the other end of the value chain with a story and then wrap up. The Island Employee Cooperative was a group of 3 businesses owned by a sole proprietor named Vernon Seal in Stonington, a remote fishing village in the Blue Hill Peninsula in Maine. He was ready to retire. His retirement was selling those stores. He needed to sell them for a decent value. But he also wanted to keep ownership local, and he wanted to figure out how to make that happen. And he wasn't getting anywhere. So we got involved with him with a number of other people, the Cooperative Development Institute, the Cooperative Fund of New England, the Independent Retailers Shared Services Cooperative, a bunch of cooperative folks, and started having a conversation. Long story short, 18 months later, we helped finance the conversion of the sole proprietorship to a 42-member worker-owned cooperative, which became the largest member-owned worker-owned cooperative in Maine, second largest in New England, giving folks, the employees of that store, and I should mention, with 60 employees, he was the largest employer in town of a year-round community of fishermen and fisherwomen. Giving folks the first time to start creating wealth for themselves and ownership. And I want to just read you a quote by from Alan White, the IEC, Island Employee Cooperative Board Chair, because I find it really inspiring and definitely gets to the heart of what we do. He said, many of us have worked in these stores for decades and never imagined we could own them. It's no small matter to keep local ownership of the stores, and the benefit of creating the cooperative continues to ripple through our community. We're still learning about leadership and management, cooperative governance, and financing. And when it feels tough, I think about the single mothers who work in the stores and now have a stake in the ownership, and how much they're depending on me and my fellow board members to make this work. He and his board are fully committed to their community. This is what we find in these communities. Everybody knows everybody. Everybody has a stake in each other's well-beings. And they're committed to the success of that business. And by the way, they're committed to the success of local agriculture because they're increasing their offerings of local products on their shelf stores as a part of the new mission and strategy for the store. So we were delighted to be a part of that success story. And it is those stories, like I said, that give us juice, get us up in the morning, get us back to work, because it is hard, it is messy. I would say, none of these really turn out as planned. The dairy farm I mentioned before, we're still trying to figure some stuff out. It's definitely a hard road. Here's another pretty picture. So these individual stones get us further down the road to build strong rural communities. As a CDC, we feel it's also our responsibility to take all of that practice and try to knit it together into initiatives or policy that can further lift the sector. So we do some things like market development, building the ethnic produce market value chain from Maine to Boston, for instance, to underserved communities in Boston who want ethnically, culturally appropriate foods. Maine producers who are looking for new market products. We think this could be pretty excellent, so let's pilot it. So we're piloting that. We're looking at, or working with and financing farms that are doing season extension around a sustainable year-round agricultural initiative. Building greenhouses that incorporate renewable technologies like solar, so that we can, in our very short 3-month growing season, at least capture the shoulders, if not, get our arms around the entire 12-month growing season. We're helping launch an organic dairy incubator program to train the next generation of organic dairy farmers in the country. It is in Maine, but those farmers can go anywhere. And this 18-month program will give them the skills and then access to capital from places like CEI, who see that as a true risk mitigator for folks who have gone through that training program. And of course, we are just now, even though I can't believe we are only doing it just now, tackling the issue of quality jobs in the food system, which historically is known for very poor quality jobs. And so we're pulling together a statewide working group to start looking at that. So there's more pictures, nice pigs. So in conclusion, you're gonna hear this the rest of the day. You heard it yesterday. Partnerships and collaborations are critical. Multiple players, the power of networks. We are only as good and as strong as the people that we surround ourselves with. We have to do this together. We cannot get this done alone. CEI is one particular model, but the components of that model, the technical assistance, the finance, is a really powerful tool for getting things done and making things happen in your communities. And then if you can knit that practice together into policy or initiatives that give further lift, then that is just added value. We're looking at scale, and I love what Brian said yesterday around the difference between vibrancy and growth, and we think of that in scale too. It's not about scaling up, but scaling right, and what is sustainable, and what is going to be viable, and what is going to create the kind of communities we all want to live in. There is no room for get bigger, get out, but I think we can get a little bigger, and so the question is, how do we do that appropriately, and who wants to do that too? Because it's not for us to say, you need to scale up your business. It needs to be this dialogue. And basically our message is, we're here if you need us to be. And finally, just an observation that risk and opportunity are inextricably entwined. We live and aim to live on what we call the growing edge. You know, we are not the leaders. I mean, we are not the entrepreneurs. People say, why can't CEI just go do this? It's like, well, that's not what we do. But what we can do is respond to client needs, anticipate them, perhaps, and be right out on the front, knowing that they're taking the big risks every day. So why can't we put ourselves out there as well and meet them there? Because it's that wonderful edge that all the good stuff happens, and all the risk and opportunity, and all the change. And I would hope at some point that mountain gets moved. So with that, oh, there's one more. That is the best yogurt around if you ever come to Maine. And hopefully they will be in the Boston Markets Milk House yogurt. And Maine Craft Distilling makes a very, very, very fine whiskey. So those are some of our farms that we've supported and businesses we've supported. And there is CEI. And I welcome conversation and questions. And thank you very much.